Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is going to be a very big show. We've spent a lot of time preparing the show. We had spent about 2 weeks preparing the data that we're going to show you for the show. And we were getting ready to do a show exclusively on that, just straight facts. And then one of our members introduced us to a guy called Mr. Beat and his review of National Divorce. And we watched his video. And so we're going to make the show focused on him because he's a well-known person and he gets a lot of facts wrong. He presents himself as an educator. Many of his colleagues see him as an educator. Many people in the comments and chat see him as educator. And he just straight up gets the facts horribly wrong, which we'll show you. And we said, well, instead of pointing him out, let's do a whole show combining how easy it is to split up states and how Mr. Beat got his facts wrong, because a lot of what he's talking about contradicts the information that we had. And so we'll get to that in just a second. But first, actually, let me show you this. So this was today's show. Mr. Beat gets his facts wrong. What if the United States did get a national divorce? That's today's show. We were originally going to do it as this show. It's easy to split up states, where we were going to, which is a continuation of this show. Actually, it's easy to split states into red and blue, where we covered Texas and Georgia are easily split. We were going to do a deep dive here. We're just going to skip that and go to this show that we're showing you now. And we were basically going to cover all this material, which I will get to in just a second. And we'll also show you some of the comments, the commentary that I had with some of the Mr. Beat followers and where our conversation went. We'll get to that in all a second. But first, please check this out soon. And I want to say welcome to everybody on behalf of Jason Wright, President, CEO of Calexit LLC, and myself, President of Calexit LLC. We'll see you in just a second. Well, Daniel, thanks for sharing the video with us. And that's why I'm doing the video, to point out how Mr. Beat got a lot of facts wrong and how he's intentionally misinforming people. Really appreciate the information. And of course, we're going to show you our sources, walk you through everything so you can see exactly what we're saying. And if you find anything we're saying wrong, you can go to the sources yourself and double check. That's something other people aren't going to do on other shows. So let's get right to it. Mr. Beat is one of a couple people who've said, you know, there really isn't division in America. That's just Marjorie Taylor Greene making that up. We don't have division in America. Mr. Beat's going to say this. I'll show you that. But I also wanted to show you that this is kind of a narrative that's going around. So here we go.
That's traitorous America last policies. We are done. Now, I mean, if you poll Americans on most substantive issues, there's actually a lot of agreement within the American electorate, regardless of which political party they affiliate with. But it's lawmakers like Marjorie Greene who have an interest in dividing the country, who have an interest in hyper-focusing on culture war issues, which many are manufactured.
So there is no division in America. She's making it up for her own benefit. Okay, that's the narrative. Let me show you another example of that.
Speaking of embarrassing,
1 second.
No, this is the most Twitter-brained, dumbass thing. Right.
Okay. Now let me show you this. At about 3:35, here's Sagar goes off.
Ever. But yeah, does it serve her interests? Sure. Sure it does. Sure. Absolutely. And as Emily pointed out, which I think is an important fact to remember, Marjorie Taylor Greene lives in Georgia. What do you do with a state like Georgia? It's a blue state? Yes. Is it a red state? Right. You know, 2 Democratic senators went for Joe Biden, but you got a Republican governor. So how's that one going to work out? And her new idea is if Democrats move into red states, they should be banned from voting for 5 years. Good. So, yeah, just very, very...
For her, It's smart if you want to make money. You know, the most cringe elements of these people, they're loving this.
Well, the thing that is funny to me is she keeps on.
So she's doing this for money, and she's a cringe element, and Georgia's blue, so you're stupid, and she's just doing this for money, and no one agrees with her. That's what Sagar and Crystal are saying. Let me show you another clip from Sagar and Crystal, so you can see that this is the definitive talking point. Let's see here, 1 second.
I have some more news from that side of the aisle. You want to set this one up, Emily?
Yep. You might get along with Fine and who voted for Warnock or who voted
Here we
for
go.
Ossoff. Exactly. The book coming apart in socioeconomic ways, in that people who are at very different ends of the socioeconomic spectrum are basically living in different worlds within our own country at this point. But that said, Marjorie Taylor Greene's argument falls apart because of her own state. What do you do with Georgia, right? I mean,
Right.
Seriously, a
Do
purple state like
you
Georgia.
live in a blue state? or a red
Exactly.
state?
Exactly. And are your neighbors who you might get along with fine and who voted for Warnock or who voted for Ossoff, what do you think of them? Do you think they should live in a different country? Do you think that they do
Okay,
live in a different
so-
country?
Georgia's blue. She probably gets along with her neighbors, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are liberal. So there's really not that much division. She even gets along with her neighbors. We all know that. Basically, there's no real division. She's just making this up. And of course, Georgia's blue. So look how stupid she is. Okay. And now I need to show you this. We're going to go to this quote here, 330-442. And here we go. 1 second.
On the show, I think, has been successful is because that is much more reflective of how people actually live in their normal lives than this like bizarrely fringe ultra online take of Marjorie Taylor Greene.
It is ultra online.
It's only if you're like okay, she says like everybody I talk to says this. Are you only talking to the worst people on Twitter? Because that's what the view of the world you would get is if you spend way too much time down a rabbit hole on like Twitter or Getter or True Social or whatever your social media of choice happens to be. But if you're actually like existing in the world and living with your neighbors, many of whom may have different ideologies and vote for different politicians than you, like this is not the experience of the country that most people have on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, so there you go. She's making this up. She's causing division for herself. There is no real division. There is no real division. People actually get along with each other. We all get along. There is no real division. We all just get along with each other. Everybody actually gets along. There's no real division. And that's exactly what Mr. Beat says. At minute 202, most Americans aren't wedded to either party. Neighbors often have different political views and get along for the most part at minute 242. No division. It's only the politicians who make divisions for themselves. At 8:55, at 11:40, Georgia is blue, and at 12 minutes in, states have no differences, and they want the same thing. So let me show you all those real quick. And this is the Mr. Beat video. And I'm going to try to make sure to get all these quotes correctly so you can hear the exact audio. Okay, so give me 1 second here.
I'm Mr. Beat. Is it time for a divorce?
Okay, so 202 to 242.
Oh, don't worry. I'm not divorcing you. I'm talking your political party. They may lean one way. Sure. Anyway, I assume, quote, red states, American states that have a majority of people who identify as Republican, and, quote, blue states are American states that have a majority of people who identify as Democrat. But that's not as easy to figure out as you might think. Sure, you could go by political party affiliation for each state, but most Americans are not strongly affiliated with either major political party. They may lean one way, but tens of millions of Americans vote for both Republicans and Democrats on election day. I bet you didn't know that, did you? There are only 4 states where the majority of
All right, that's first thing I want you to see. 242. Let's go to that now.
residents are Republican, and 7 states where the majority of residents are Democrat. Also, as I stressed in my American urban-rural political divide video, most Americans who live in urban areas tend to favor the Democratic Party, and most Americans who live in rural areas tend to favor the Republican Party. However, even within cities and rural areas, neighbors often have different political views. My own neighborhood has Republicans and Democrats living in it. They get along for the most part, but I get it. There's always going to be...
So there is no real division. Neighbors have different political views. We all get along. There isn't really division. So that's him repeating the same points. That's what I wanted to point out. Let me just draw down on this really hardcore. 8:55 and 12 minutes in.
Perhaps making this video was a waste of time. You see, pretty much every American values freedom, and I'd argue most Americans agree on most political issues. You just wouldn't know it due to certain opportunistic, attention-seeking politicians. The day after
So most Americans agree there is no real division. Marjorie Taylor Greene did that because she's an opportunistic politician attempting to make that happen. And then we can go to minute 12. And let me show you that too.
Representative Greene's controversial national divorce tweet, she elaborated with a Twitter thread. And I'm just going to... State borders in the United States are often barely noticeable anyway. I know I stressed a lot of the differences, but these days, most states have way more in common than differences, whether politicians like to admit it or not. Sure, Americans seem...
There you go. There's no real differences. We're all together. There's no real division. She's just making this up on her own. So I just wanted you to see the commonalities in the narrative from here and here and here and here with Mr. B. Same thing. No real division. She's making it up. Division doesn't exist. Neighbors basically get along. What's she talking about? And this is what really bothers me, is that Mr. Beat is a specialist in American history and has a big passion for geography, economics, and politics. He tries to inform people, and I love that, but wow, did he misinform people? So let's get right into that. Now that we've shown you what everybody was trying to say, then this is the question for you. Why do so many people act like this nation hasn't been talking about increased division? Why do so many people say, I get along with my neighbors? I get along with my neighbors. There's no division. She's making it up. She does this for herself because there's no real division, and she's just doing it for herself to promote herself. Let me show you the same standard facts I've been showing everybody. By the way, you won't see any of this covered by the Young Turks or Breaking Point News or Mr. Beat. These facts that I'm going to show you are extensive and completely and totally ignored. Watch them, and then you can tell me who's actually telling the truth. All right, let's get right to it. So this is the start of division in America. So the first thing to point out is there's the survey by Brightline Research, Brightline Watch Research in June 2021 that showed 47% of Democrats on the West Coast were open to secession and 66% of Republicans in the South were open to secession. So that's 47% Democrats on the West Coast right there. in the blue circle and 66% Republicans in the South. That red circle that's the largest one on the map is the one that represents Georgia and where she's from. So when she says she talks to other people about this, that's represented in the survey. That 47% blue also almost is identical to the 47.5% of Californians who were open to discussing secession, according to Reuters, Ipsos, and Stanford University in 2017. There's another poll, Center for Politics, Sabato Cristobal out of the University of Virginia. 80% of Biden voters and 84% of Trump voters feel elected officials from the other party are a danger to the USA. 74% of Biden voters and 78% of Trump voters feel voters from the other party are a danger to the USA. So basically 4/5 of all Democrats believe all elected officials and all people who vote Republicans are a clear and present threat to America. And about 4/5 of all Republicans feel that all democratically elected officials and everybody who votes Democrat is a clear and present danger to America. 41% of Biden voters support national divorce. 52% of Trump supporters support national divorce. Here's the surveys to show you where they came from. And this is from September 2021. Not very old. Now let's go to NPR. NPR has been covering the sort between us. There's a book called The Big Sort. It came out in the early thousands. Here's an article from NPR in 2008, where they're talking about how Americans are separating themselves by their will into red and blue communities. Here's a follow-up to the article. In 2022, over 10 years later, NPR saying the exact same thing. They covered in 2008 and then they covered in 2022, saying the trend continues. The book, The Big Sort, is correct. What does The Big Sort talk about? Well, same thing that the New York Times talked about in 2016. There's something called landslide voting counties. Counties that voted for the Republican or Democratic presidential candidate by 20 points or more. So if you look at this map, all you need to do is recognize there's three colors. Blue is Democrat, red is Republican, and gray is where you have a competitive chance to be a Democrat or a Republican. So the gray areas, they're not super wedded to a political ideology. They'll vote for whoever's the best candidate. And as you can see, there's 1992, half the country's gray. Then look at 2012. It's about 1/10 of the country's gray. 1992, half the country gray. 2012, 1/10 of the country gray. And you can see how it disappeared over years. That means all these gray American counties went from I'm open to a Democrat to a Republican to I only vote Republican or I only vote Democrat, period, end of story. This is what they're talking about. This is what the New York Times brought up in 2016. This is what NPR brought up in 2022 and 2008. People are not entertaining the other party. They're voting in landslide counties. Landslide counties are exploding. Here's the 2016 one. But if that's not good enough, you can look at presidential elections. So these are presidential election maps by county. And what you'll notice is, see the map on the left? That's the 2000 election. See the map on the right? This is the 2020 election. See how this map has a lot of light pink in the Midwest, throughout the South, throughout parts of Southern California and parts of Arizona? See how this map has almost no light pink and only bright red and bright blue? That's because people shifted into the landslide voting counties, which perfectly matches this. So you can look at the presidential election maps from 2000 to 2020 over a 20-year period. Here's another version, the same thing, by a scientist out of Princeton. See how this map in 2004 has a lot of purple in the upper Midwest, in the Northeast, kind of in here in the Southwest, kind of here in the South. See how all that purple's gone? This is the 2020 presidential election. A lot more purple in this map, less purple in this map. It says the same thing as these maps. It says the same thing as these maps. It says the same thing as the New York Times article. It says the same thing as the NPR articles. So this has been covered from 1992, certainly from the 2000 election, the last 20 years. How are they talking about how there's no differences? Then Time Magazine did an article. Would you date someone with different political beliefs? About a third of the people would not date someone outside of the political party in 2012. It is now more than half in 2020. So we've gone from 30% to 50% of all Americans say, I don't date anyone outside of my political party. This came out 2 years ago. Time Magazine. Here's the Pew Research Center, one of the most reputable research centers on earth. Do a lot of global surveys. 2017, partisan divide on political values grows even wider. Sharp shift among Democrats on hate, needy, race, and immigration. And here's the chart. So what you're looking at is race, religion, attendance, education, age, gender, are all those lines on the bottom. They kind of stayed the same. Then when you look at party affiliation, it goes from 15 to 36. So everything that used to divide Americans hasn't really changed from 1994 to 2017. But if you look at 1994 to 2017, and you look at party affiliation, huge, gigantic growth in party division. There it is. That's by NPR. I'm not NPR, by the Pew Research Center. I challenge anybody to challenge the Pew Research Center. Then there's also this. They said, liberals don't talk about this, but this was major national news. Sarah Silverman said, maybe we should break up. National news. Ron Perlman, also liberal, said, maybe we should break up. National news, completely forgotten about it. People forget that when Joe Biden gave his ultra MAGA speech, it caused a huge backlash with independents and Republicans and Democrats going, damn, Joe, you're splitting up the country. Independent voters say Biden's attack on MAGA Republicans went too far. Trump leaves America at its most divided since the Civil War. He says, no division in America. Neighbors basically get along. States basically get along. No division. All of this stuff, he doesn't cover it all. Makes no mention of it at all. Doesn't cover any of these facts, and then makes that conclusion. And yet these were all national news stories. How did he accidentally forget about all these national news stories? Isn't that strange? National news stories, facts, and you went with the same interpretation of Breaking Points twice and the Young Turks. This woman's crazy. There's no division. She's doing it for herself. Garbage. Misinformation. And you totally missed a bunch of key facts that have been national stories for 2 decades. And you hold yourself up as an educator? Sir, you are a charlatan. Sorry. You can't hold yourself up as an educator and get this many facts wrong and not mention them at all. But I want to point something out. It doesn't stop there. So I actually got into a conversation with some of the people on Mr. Beat's show. And I posted this. I said it's easy to split up states. It's not that hard. I kind of covered this topic. And here were some of the responses that I got. One is by Mo Ball, and the other is by Linebacker65. So, and here's the thing. Mr. Beat highlighted the response Linebacker365 sent to me, and he highlighted the response Mo Ball sent to me, but he did not paste my response to them. So these guys were not highlighted when I talked to them. They were highlighted after I got into an argument with them. My comment to him and him was removed. Their comments were highlighted. So now you can't see what I'm saying, and you can't see any of the facts I mentioned, which I just showed you. And instead, you're going to see these points, which are ignorant and uninformed, and now they're highlighted. Marcus Rees-Evans, your analysis is too simplistic. Splitting states according to MTG's absurd proposal would be incredibly difficult and, of course, illegal. That's a lie. It's basically an urban-rural divide in America, but there's still lots of Republicans in cities and many Democrats in rural areas. I agreed with that, but I showed how that's not a problem. The Central Valley in California is majority Republican. That's a lie. I pointed out to, I'm from here. And every election's been going one way. Half the valley's blue, and it's also going more blue. And everything shows a trajectory of more blue votes because of people called Mexicans that look like me. So totally wrong. Tons of Republicans live in Orange and San Diego counties. Sure. Texas is not so simple because there's blue counties containing Houston, Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio. I pointed out that in Texas, there's an urban triangle. And so the blue cities are actually right next to each other in what's called an urban triangle of Texas. And most of all of Texas is conservative. And so it'd be easy to isolate those three blue metro areas together and isolate them from the rest of the state. All of that commentary I just told you was erased. So nobody's going to see that. With the Supreme Court decision on Roe, several states had ready-made legislation to eliminate abortions. When pro-choice voices said then, what are women supposed to do that live in those states and are in a situation to need an abortion? The answer was to go to state where you could get one. Except the same states seeking to eliminate abortions also decided they didn't like people going to other states. So now they're passing legislation to disallow this. You may go to another state to get an abortion, but if you come back home, you'll be facing murder charges. So legislation is underway to restrict movement between states. Now imagine a national divorce and the same thing applying. You're a conservative living in California or a liberal living in Florida, and the government in your red or blue county says you aren't allowed to move. What the kind of hell will that be? I responded with, yes, red states said abortion's illegal in our state, and if you travel to another state to get an abortion, that will be illegal. No red state ever said or has proposed ever, even after Roe v. Wade, that you are not allowed to move to another state because that's unconstitutional and patently illegal. So nobody has said, imagine a national divorce and the same thing applying. States don't have the right to ban you from moving, period. No red state who's pro-abortion, who's pro-anti-abortion has said people don't have the right to leave, period. So this whole argument is moot. They said you can't go to another state, get an abortion, and come back. Nobody has said you're unable to move and we will have armed guards stop you if you want to move to another state. Nobody. So this is a completely worthless argument. They haven't stopped people from moving, and people can move, and people have been moving, as I showed you. Additionally, Texas can be split up. The Central Valley isn't blue, and it is easy to divide the area, and I'll show you. But I just want to show you some of these comments. Now, here's the meat and potatoes. This was going to be the original show. Let me stop for a second. Okay. All right, we're good. I just had to make sure that was showing. So this was going to be the original show. It's easy to split up states. You can still see it, the title bar in the video. And what we're going to be looking at is, and this is a continuation of this map. I got a lot of positive feedback on this, so I went ahead and said we're going to do a whole show on it. I just looked at 2 states and quickly showed how you could do it. Then I went a deep dive. My background's in urban and regional planning, so I'm actually quite qualified to do this. So I have a degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Southern California. I graduated with a 3.65 GPA magna cum laude, and I was accepted into the master's program for planning. USC was the 3rd highest ranked urban planning school in the world at that time, and the master's program was the #1 urban planning school in the world. So this is an area that I'm actually professionally trained in. What we're going to look at is electrical power maps, water district maps, water flowing maps. So here's the electrical maps, water district maps, water flow maps, transportation maps, population maps, and finally election maps. So let's do this. I want you all to be able to see this. So if you look closely, these blue dots are Atlanta. Same thing here if you look at the population map. That deep red blob is Atlanta, and then the rest of it is Georgia. And if you look at here, basically Atlanta's blue, and then the entire rest of Georgia is red. Yeah, there's a few little cities that are blue, but they are massively outnumbered by the red. What really makes Georgia swing blue, as some people purport and is incorrect, is Atlanta itself. Atlanta is the thing that pushes Georgia blue. The rest of Georgia is really red. Well, here's the transportation map. So Atlanta's there in the freeways. And then you can see there's other freeway networks throughout the rest of Georgia, and they have a bunch of roads connecting them. So if Georgia broke between Atlanta and the rest, they have an entire highway freeway network connecting them. They also have rivers throughout the entire state. They also have already broken up their Georgia area into separate water districts. Water District 1 and 2 are Atlanta. All of the other districts are not Atlanta. So Georgia's already split up into basically Atlanta and then the rest of Georgia that's not Atlanta. There's a little bit of Section 6 there, but Sections 1 and 2 are Atlanta, a little bit of 6. The rest of 6, all of 7, all of 5, 4, 3, 10, 8, 11, 9 are already separated to separate water districts. Then we can look at this map. This is an electrical distribution regional map. It shows where power comes from and power generations. And what you'll notice there is the green plot is Atlanta. And then the other gray, peach, and blue is the rest of Georgia. You'll notice a series of green and orange dots in the gray and in the peach and in this light gray. Those are power stations, meaning that the people in the rest of Georgia already have separate power districts and separate power stations. And so when we look at Georgia, what we can see is that Georgia is already separated by power districts, already separated by water districts, already separated with multiple water, already has an extensive freeway network that could supply the rest of Georgia. So you could actually take the water and the power districts and use that as a way of splitting up Georgia. And it would be an easy split because they already have water districts and power districts that operate independently from each other, hence their districts. They also have water everywhere, and they already have transportation linkages everywhere. And as this map shows, it would separate into largely blue and red. Most of the blue is in the specific Atlanta area. Now let's take a look at Texas, where you're going to see largely the same thing. We'll start from the far right and go left. This is the Texas election map. As you can see, Fort Worth, Dallas is one major metro area. Then it goes down to Austin, San Antonio, and then to Houston. Those three blobs are called the urban triangle. Dallas down to Houston, Houston over to San Antonio up to Fort Worth. It's a metro triangle. The entire rest of Texas is largely red. Yes, there's a few blue cities there in El Paso along the Mexican border. But what really makes Texas look like it's being split between red and blue is those three metro areas. How do we know that? Because it maps this population map. Dark red, Dallas up top, Houston in the coast, and there is Austin and San Antonio. These three red areas could be linked and form a separate network, and the entire rest of Texas would largely stay red. Let's take a look at the transportation network. What you're going to see, there you go. So you can see the three major metro areas, but you can also see there's a ton of roads outside of those metro areas connecting the rest of Texas. So the rest of Texas, even if it was cut off from those metro areas, and you can literally see the triangle. So there's Dallas, and then there's one big fat 45 freeway that goes down to the 10 freeway, and then you take the 35 freeway back up. That's what they call the triangle. The rest of Texas has an extensive freeway network. Let's take a look at water. Actually, most of Texas has a lot of rivers and waters. And then if we look at districts, this is the water district. The urban districts are probably 8, 15, 12, and 14, which means 6, 2, 7, 3, 5, 4, 9, 10, 16, and 11, and most of 8 and 1 are not. So again, you can already separate this by water districts. Now let's take, and then here's the power districts. Already broken up. So Houston is the coastal district, Dallas is the north central district, and San Antonio and Austin are the south central districts. So the north central, south central, and coast would go to one state. All of the other power districts, the north, east, west, far west, and south, would stay in that Texas. And this is the point. These states are already split up into different infrastructure divisions. Every state does this. You already have separate power sections, separate water sections. They got to make sure to provide the power there and the water there for their section. That's why they're separated. There's water everywhere, transportation network everywhere. And we could easily cut off these three because they're nearby each other, leaving the bulk or 80% of the landmass of Texas, which is red, and would stay red once they're separated from that urban triangle easily. Let's take a look in Illinois. Here's Illinois. The blue thing up top is Chicago, as you can see in this population map. So the red thing in the top right corner is Chicago. That's what makes Illinois blue. The entire rest of Illinois is red. As you can see here, very strong blue in the top right corner, the rest red. Let's take a look at the freeway network. Well, yes, Chicago has a lot of freeways, but the entire rest of the state has extensive high-level freeway networks and then collector arterials. So they have a lot of roads. They could easily make it work. Additionally, there are rivers throughout the state. Additionally, here's the water districts. There's Chicago, 2A. So water districts 1, 2B, 2D, 3, 5, and 4 are not Chicago and could be separated. Here's the Chicago electrical utilities map. The light yellow is the Chicago area. The dark peach is the entire rest of Illinois. So you could literally separate Illinois by the electrical district and maybe water districts 2C and 2A, and that would make a separate Chicago separated from the rest of Illinois. Illinois already has most of the state outside of Chicago, a separate water district and a separate electrical district, and they have rivers and roads. And again, it would match the population thing. You move that one blue area in the top right out, the entire rest of the state stays red for a very long time. Not done. Here's Oregon, same thing. Look at the population. I don't know why that map's screwing up. Population is just there at the top, and it kind of goes along the 5 freeway there in the top left-hand corner. If we look at the maps, the road network. Road network is not as good as the other states, but there still are roads connecting the interior of Oregon. Oops. Sorry. And then as we move across, see all those separate water districts. And then as we move across, see all the separate power districts. So again, Oregon's already separated into multiple different power districts. It's already separated into separate water districts. It already has a road system. And the population can easily be divided from the top left-hand corner, which is blue, and then 3/4 of the rest of the population, which is red. Same thing here with California. We've gotten into a lot of debates, and this is the one that I got into debate with those guys. So there's California. In 2008, the black line is where Republicans controlled. 2018 is where they controlled then. And the 2020 election and the 2022 election also back up this same pattern. The Central Valley's turning blue. Half of it is blue. Orange County, San Diego are blue. All of LA is blue. All the interior is blue. Conservatives really only control the mountains and the far north and Bakersfield. So it would be easy to separate them because if you look at California, the entire road network is in the blue system. The entire economic drivers of the entire economy is in the blue. Where are all the universities? In the blue. Where are all the jobs? In the blue. Where are all the travel destinations? In the blue. Where do most people go to? In the blue. Where does venture capital go? Into blue. So we could easily split California off from the mountains in the far north, and it would mean nothing. And we'd have a massive chunk of the Central Valley farm community, except for the Bakersfield area. And that's the point. Here's a zoom in map. I know the graphics aren't that great, but you can largely see, you know, how would we split up these states? Well, you take the top north left corner of Georgia. You take the triangle out of Texas, you take the top right corner out of Illinois, and you take the top left corner out of Oregon. That leaves in each case 3/4 of the state staying conservative. And I just showed you where each state is already broken up into electrical and power units that can be disengaged from each other to allow the separation, and they would not have a transportation issue. Now, what gets me is that no one mentions this at all. No one mentions this at all. All I've heard is it would be so hard to split up the states. You couldn't do it. It'd basically be impossible. Nobody has done a deep dive looking at power, water districts, waterways, freeways, population, and voting patterns for Georgia, Texas, Illinois, Oregon, and California, proving, yeah, you can actually separate them, and it's not that hard. And again, I pointed that out to these guys, and all my comments were erased. Which brings me to this point. It's truly sad to hold yourself out as a facts guy and then misinform the public, cut out information, and then censor and control the conversation. I don't view you as a facts guy. So that's basically the show. I hope so. I hope he sees this video. The thing is, I'm willing to debate all these people. They'll never agree to debate me. So I can't get anyone to debate me. They'll watch a video and then that's it. I never hear from them. So they'll make all sorts of comments. I'll point out how a lot of stuff is incorrect, and I'll show the original sources and show where you can get the information, and then I never hear from them. So that's what that is. So there you go. You've seen it. This is the talking point. There is no real division. Everything's fine. Everything works out. And then I showed you a bunch of facts that go back 2 decades. And the Young Turks got them wrong. And Breaking Point's got them wrong twice. And Mr. Beat got them all wrong too. How did so many people from so many different backgrounds who hold themselves up to be news and information and educators get it all wrong and not recognize any of the facts I mentioned? They didn't even get one. I pointed out like 15. They couldn't even cover one. It's almost like they want to intentionally mislead you, and they're hoping that you're too damn dumb and ignorant to remember what was on the news for the last 3 years. We'll leave it there. Thank you, everybody. Please share the show with anybody who thinks it's not easy to split up states. They're wrong. Or there isn't division in America and Marjorie Taylor Greene's just making it up. That's a lie. See you soon.